It's 5:30 p.m. The emails are still coming in, the kids need dinner, and your brain is running through everything that went sideways today. So you open a bottle of wine, pour a glass, and for about 15 minutes, something in you finally goes quiet. You've earned this, you need this, and it feels like it's working. But here's what's actually happening underneath that feeling. Your nervous system isn't recovering. It's been put on hold. And every time you use that glass as the off switch, you're making it harder for your brain to find the off switch on its own. Today, I want to walk you through the science of why alcohol feels like stress relief, what it's actually doing to your stress system while you sleep, and what your brain is genuinely looking for instead. Why your brain thinks alcohol is relaxing. Let me start with what's real. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. So when it hits your bloodstream, it slows things down. Cognition, self-awareness, the mental chatter that's been running since 7 a.m. That slowdown genuinely feels like calm. Your thoughts get quieter. The tension in your shoulders eases. You stop rehearsing the difficult conversation you need to have tomorrow. From the inside, that feels exactly like relaxing, because in a lot of ways it is. The problem is that feeling calm and actually recovering from stress are two completely different things. And alcohol gives you the first one while quietly blocking the second. There's a well-studied framework called the Attention Allocation Model, developed by researchers Steele and Josephs back in 1988, and it explains a lot about why alcohol's effects on stress are so inconsistent. The basic idea is this: alcohol narrows your attention to whatever is most noticeable in your environment at that moment. If you're at a party with music and people and conversation pulling your focus, alcohol works really well at reducing stress because there's nothing threatening to focus on. The distractions are doing the work, and the alcohol just keeps you locked onto them. But if you pour a glass after a hard day, alone or in a quiet house, the most salient thing in your environment is still the problem. The unfinished project, the conversation that didn't go well, the decision you're not sure about. Alcohol narrows your focus right onto it. There's also something called the appraisal disruption effect, and this one matters a lot if you're drinking after work. Research shows that drinking before a stressor, before you get the bad news, before the difficult meeting, can actually blunt how your brain processes it. Your threat response gets muted before it fully fires. But drinking after the stressor, which is what almost all of us are doing, has mixed results at best and no meaningful effect at worst. The event has already been registered. Your brain has already done its threat appraisal. The wine isn't changing that. There's even a name for what happens when post-stressor drinking goes wrong. Researchers call it the crying in your beer effect. Instead of dulling the emotional weight of what happened, drinking after a hard day can actually intensify it. You sit with the thing longer, you process it less clearly. The emotional charge of it doesn't dissolve, it settles in. I noticed this in myself before I understood the mechanism. I'd pour a glass thinking I'd feel lighter, and instead I'd end up replaying the worst parts of the day in slow motion. The wine wasn't making me feel better. It was making me feel quieter and worse at the same time. So if the glass isn't actually resolving the stress, what is it doing to your body while you sleep? What alcohol actually does to your stress system. To understand what's actually happening while you sleep off that glass of wine, you need to know about a chemical in your brain called Corticotropin Releasing Factor, or CRF. I know that sounds clinical, so let me give you the plain version. CRF is essentially your brain's pressure management system. When you go through something hard, a stressful meeting, a conflict, a deadline that nearly broke you, CRF activates certain neurons that help your brain process what happened, adapt to it, and build back stronger. It's the biological engine behind resilience. Every time it fires properly, you come out of the experience a little more capable of handling the next one. Alcohol interferes with that process directly. Research shows it weakens CRF activation in the specific neurons responsible for stress adaptation. So instead of your brain working through the day's pressure while you rest, it goes quiet. The processing stops. You're not recovering, you're just pausing. And there's a real difference between those two things. The pause doesn't hold, though. Alcohol metabolizes in roughly 3 to 4 hours. When it clears your system, usually somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m., All that suppressed CRF activity floods back at once. Cortisol spikes. Your nervous system, which thought the threat was gone, suddenly gets flooded with stress signals that were never actually resolved. That's the 3 AM wake up. Not a coincidence, not just a bathroom trip. Your body is catching up on the stress processing it couldn't do while the alcohol was in the way. You probably know this feeling, even if you didn't have a name for it. You wake up with your heart going slightly faster than it should. The mental list starts before you're even fully conscious. And even after a full night in bed, you feel less rested than you should. Tired but wired, with a lower threshold for frustration and a harder time concentrating than the day before. That's not a hangover, not after one glass. That's your stress system trying to finish a job that got interrupted. 2026 research from Texas A&M University put a sharper edge on this. Their work gave us the clearest neural picture yet of how stress and alcohol interact at the level of individual brain cells, showing how alcohol hinders the decision-making neurons we rely on under pressure. For anyone running a business, managing people, making calls with incomplete information, holding the strategic thread across 100 competing demands, those are exactly the neurons you can't afford to have running at reduced capacity the next morning. And this is where the nightly ritual becomes a real problem, because it's not a single event. One glass on a genuinely difficult Friday is one thing. But when the glass becomes the routine answer to the end of every hard day, you're training your nervous system in a very specific direction. You're teaching it that the only way the high alert phase ends is through a chemical signal. Over time, your brain stops investing in the internal mechanisms that allow you to downregulate on your own because it's learned it doesn't need to. The pause button gets easier to reach and harder to put down. The phrase I keep coming back to for this is borrowing against your resilience. Every time the wine does the recovery work your nervous system should be doing, you're drawing down something that doesn't automatically refill. Your baseline stress tolerance, how much you can absorb before it starts to show, quietly drops. The days don't get harder, you just get less equipped to meet them. Now here's what's worth knowing. Your brain isn't actually looking for alcohol. It's looking for something specific that alcohol happens to provide, and there are cleaner ways to give it exactly that. What your brain is actually looking for. So let me reframe what's actually going on at 5:30 p.m. because this changes how you think about the whole thing. The wine isn't really the point. The transition is the point. What your brain needs at the end of a hard day isn't a specific chemical. It needs a clear signal that the high alert phase is finished. A concrete, reliable cue that says, the decisions are done, the threats are managed, it's safe to downregulate now. Alcohol delivers that signal. The problem is the delivery system, not the destination. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that processes threat and keeps you scanning for danger, stays elevated as long as it thinks you're still in the middle of something. And for most of us who run businesses or manage households that function like small businesses, the amygdala has been firing since before breakfast. Light drinking does reduce amygdala activity, the research confirms that, which is part of why the relief feels so real. But exercise does the same thing, meditation does the same thing, a genuine social connection does the same thing. The difference is those options don't produce a cortisol rebound at 3 a.m, don't impair the neurons you need the next morning, and don't train your nervous system out of its own recovery capacity. This is where the behavioral replacement framework becomes useful, and I want to be clear that I'm not talking about willpower or just making healthier choices. I'm talking about hitting the same neurological target with a different tool. Your brain wants the transition signal. Give it one that doesn't come with the debt attached. A deliberate closing ritual for the workday is one of the most underrated tools I've come across for this. Not a long one. 5 minutes works. The act of physically closing your laptop, writing tomorrow's top 3 priorities on paper, and saying out loud, I'm done for today, is a behavioristic boundary signal. You're not just stopping work, you're marking the end of the threat window. Your amygdala responds to that kind of concrete sensory cue better than it responds to time passing. Exercise is probably the most direct replacement because it mimics what alcohol does to amygdala activity without any of the downstream costs. Even a 15-minute walk after work, especially outside, shifts your nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic state, from high alert to rest and digest. And it does it through mechanisms your body already knows. You don't have to run 5 miles. You just have to move your body through space for long enough that your brain registers the shift. Mindfulness and body scan practices work through a slightly different mechanism, but arrive at the same place. A short body scan, 5 to 10 minutes, where you move your attention deliberately through physical sensation rather than thought, interrupts the stress appraisal loop that keeps replaying the day's events. It's not relaxation in the passive sense. It's an active signal to your nervous system that the environment is safe. And social connection is worth naming specifically because the attention allocation research we covered earlier actually supports it. The stress reduction benefit that alcohol provides in social settings comes mostly from the distraction and connection, not the drink itself. A real conversation with someone you trust, a shared meal, even a phone call while you cook dinner. Those give your brain the attentional shift it's looking for without requiring anything chemical to work. The identity layer matters here too, and I want to name it honestly. A lot of high-performing women use the wine ritual as permission. Permission to stop working, permission to stop being on, permission to take up space and need something for themselves. That permission is completely legitimate. The work isn't giving up the rituals, it's learning to give yourself that permission without a prop. Because if the only way you can justify stopping is by pouring something, you haven't actually given yourself permission. You've just found a workaround. Building a real recovery ritual. I don't want to leave you with a list of things to try someday. So let me give you something concrete you could actually start tonight. The concept is a transition window, a 15 to 20 minute block right after the workday ends that belongs entirely to the shift from high alert to recovery. Not productivity time, not family coordination time, a neurological handoff. What goes in that window matters less than the fact that it exists and that it's consistent, because consistency is how your nervous system learns to trust it. A short walk works well for most people because it combines movement, sensory input, and a clear physical break from the work environment. A warm shower works for the same reasons. It's a sensory signal with a beginning and an end, and your body knows the difference between shower before work and shower to close the day if you use them consistently at different times. 5 minutes of slow breathing, specifically extending your exhale longer than your inhale, activates the vagal brake directly, which is your body's fastest route to parasympathetic state. A specific playlist that you only use during this window works too. Your brain learns associations quickly, and music tied to transition becomes a genuine cue over time. Meal timing is something most people don't connect to stress, but it matters here. Eating a balanced meal, protein, fat, fiber, before or during your wind-down window stabilizes blood sugar, and blood sugar instability is a direct cortisol trigger. Alcohol drops blood sugar and then causes a rebound spike, which is part of what feeds that 3 a.m. cortisol surge. A real meal does the opposite, and it gives your nervous system the metabolic stability it needs to actually rest. One thing I want to address before we close this out: you don't have to become the person who never drinks. That's not what this is about. The goal is to stop using alcohol as your primary stress management tool, the default answer to every hard day. Because that's the pattern that borrows against your resilience. When your nervous system learns to recover on its own, your baseline stress tolerance genuinely rises. The same days feel more manageable, not because they get easier, but because you're meeting them with a full tank instead of a depleted one. That 5:30 p.m. glass feels like relief because it quiets your brain, but it's blocking the recovery your body actually needs to show up strong tomorrow. The ritual isn't the problem. What you fill it with is, if you want to go deeper on building a pre-sleep routine that actually works with your nervous system instead of against it, I've got a video on exactly that. I'll link it right here. And if this helped you see something you hadn't connected before, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.